war began the way most wars begin, with a mistake. A small trading vessel from the Kethra Dominion crossed into a region of space that the humans of Earth had marked as their own. The Kethra captain did not know this. His maps were old, and the borders of human space had grown fast in the last 20 years. He saw an empty system, rich in metal-heavy asteroids, and he sent down mining drones to take what he could. He did not know that a small human outpost sat on the third moon of that system. He did not know that 12 humans lived there, watching the stars, mining the same asteroids for their own colony. When his drones broke into the human mining tunnels and killed 4 workers by accident, the Kethra captain panicked. He fired on the outpost to destroy the evidence. 8 humans died that day. The Kethra Dominion did not mean to start a war. They sent an apology. They offered payment, but the human government did not accept money for the dead. They asked for the captain to be handed over for trial. The Kethra Dominion refused, saying their laws did not allow this. Words became threats. Threats became a blockade. The blockade became battle. And so began the war between the Kethra Dominion and Earth. The Kethra Dominion was not a small power. It ruled 40 star systems and commanded a battle fleet of 12,000 ships. It had fought 3 wars before against other species and won every one. Its leaders were proud people, tall and thin, with pale blue skin and eyes that could see in the dark. They called themselves the First Race, because their written history stretched back further than any other species they had ever met. When the war with Earth began, the Kethra High Command expected an easy fight. Their scouts reported that Earth had colonized only 9 systems. Earth's fleet, by their counting, held less than 2,000 ships. The Kethra had 6 times that number. "Send the Third Fleet," said Grand Marshal Vesia Tor, the commander of all Kethra military forces. 2,000 ships. That should end this before the humans understand what has happened to them. The Third Fleet left Kethra space 3 weeks later. 2,000 warships, carrying 500,000 soldiers, moved toward the human colony called New Delhi Station, the largest human shipyard outside the home system. They expected to meet the human fleet in open space and destroy it in a single battle. They found only 1 ship waiting for them. The Kethra sensors first picked it up at the edge of the New Delhi system. It was small compared to a Kethra battleship, no bigger than a heavy cruiser. It carried no fleet with it, no support ships, no fighters, nothing but itself, sitting quietly between the Third Fleet and the human shipyard. Marshal Denu Kal, commander of the Third Fleet, laughed when he saw the sensor reading. "1 ship," he said to his officers. "The humans have sent 1 ship to stop 2,000 of ours. Either they are fools, or they have lost their minds from fear." His second officer, a younger Kethra named Isvren, studied the sensor data more closely. "Marshal, the ship is not broadcasting any fleet identification. No name, no registry number that our systems recognize. Perhaps it is a scout, sent to die so it can report our numbers," Denu Kal said. "Destroy it, and continue to the shipyard." Isvren gave the order. 40 warships broke from the main fleet and moved to intercept the single human vessel. It was overkill, using 40 ships against 1, but Denu Kal wanted this over quickly, and he wanted no risk at all. The 40 ships closed the distance, their sensors locked onto the human vessel, their weapons charged. The human ship did not run. It did not call for help. It did not even change its speed. It simply waited. At a distance, the Kethra called, "Engagement range." The 40 ships opened fire together. Beam weapons and missile swarms crossed the dark toward the single human ship, enough firepower to tear apart a Kethra dreadnought 3 times over. Every shot missed. Not most shots. Not nearly all shots. Every single shot passed through the space where the human ship should have been, and found nothing there. Isvren checked his instruments twice, sure that something had gone wrong with the sensors. But the ship was still there, exactly where it had been, apparently untouched and unmoving. It was as if it had never been struck at all, as if the weapons had simply forgotten to hit it. "Fire again," Denu Kal ordered, his voice tighter now. "All 40 ships, full spread." They fired again. Again, nothing struck the human ship. Then the human ship moved. It did not accelerate the way Kethra ships accelerated, with a visible burn of engines and a slow build of speed. It simply was somewhere else a moment later, closer to the Kethra formation. as if the space between had folded and let it step through. A single beam of light left the human ship. It struck the lead Kethra cruiser, and the cruiser did not explode in the way ships usually explode, with fire and debris scattering into the dark. It simply came apart, as though its very structure had lost the ability to hold together, and its pieces drifted silently, already cold. Then a second beam, a second ship gone. Isvren watched in horror as the human vessel moved through the formation of 40 Kethra warships, untouched by anything they fired at it, destroying one ship after another, with what looked like almost no effort at all. There was no pattern to which ship it struck next. There was no mercy in how quickly it worked. In under 6 minutes, all 40 Kethra ships were gone, and the human vessel had not taken a single hit. On the bridge of the flagship, Marshal Denu Kal stood in silence, staring at the tactical display. 40 ships, 3,000 soldiers, gone in 6 minutes. "Recall the fleet," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All ships, fall back to the rally point. We are not proceeding to New Delhi Station." The retreat saved most of the Third Fleet, but the story of what happened at New Delhi Station spread through Kethra space faster than any official report could travel. Soldiers talked. Officers talked. By the time Grand Marshal Vesiator received the full account, 3 different versions were already circulating among the enlisted ranks, each one stranger than the last. Vesiator called for the full sensor logs from Isvren's ship, the only vessel of the 40-ship strike group that had stayed at the edge of the engagement and survived by pure distance. She watched the recording in her private office, alone, 3 times over. She saw the same thing each time: a single ship, unnamed, unmarked, moving through concentrated fire without being touched, tearing apart warships as though they were made of paper. "What is this?" she said quietly to herself. Her intelligence officers had no answer. Human ship registries, gathered by spies over the past 2 years, showed nothing that matched this vessel's size or shape. It did not appear in any listing of Earth's known fleet. It was as if the ship had come from nowhere, built by no shipyard the Kethra Dominion had ever recorded. Vesiator sent an official message to the human government, demanding to know the designation of the vessel that had destroyed 40 Kethra ships at New Delhi Station. She expected a name. Every warship had a name. Every navy in the galaxy named its vessels, whether after heroes, cities, or old and honored words. The human reply came back 3 days later. It was short. "The vessel you are asking about has no name that we will share with you. We ask that you do not attempt to learn it. This is not a request made from politeness. It is a warning made for your own good." Vesiator read the message twice, then set it down on her desk. She had led Kethra forces for 30 years. She had faced 3 wars and never once received a message like this from an enemy government. It was not a threat, not exactly. It read almost like a kindness, strange as that seemed, coming from the people who had just annihilated 40 of her ships. She did not understand it. But she understood one thing clearly. This was no longer a small border conflict that could be ended with an apology and a trial. This was a war against something the Kethra Dominion did not understand, something that could destroy a fleet of 40 ships without taking a single hit in return. She called an emergency session of the Kethra High Command that same night. The High Command chamber on Kethra Prime held 11 seats, 1 for each of the senior military and political leaders of the Dominion. When Vesiator stood before them and played the sensor recording from New Delhi Station, the chamber fell into a silence that lasted almost a full minute after the recording ended. "This is impossible," said Chancellor Ranashal, the Dominion's political leader, finally breaking the quiet. "One ship cannot defeat 40. Our sensors, our weapons. This must be some kind of trick. A hologram. A weapon we do not understand, but not the ship itself."
"I have reviewed the logs from 3 separate vessels," Vesiator said. "The readings agree. The ship was there."
"It was solid. It took no damage because nothing we fired ever struck it. And it destroyed 40 ships using weapons our scanners cannot identify." "Then we send more ships," said General Karth Doiv, commander of the Kethra Home Fleet. 100, 200. No single vessel, however strange its weapons, can survive against overwhelming numbers. "That is what I believed as well, before I watched this recording," Vesiator said. "I am no longer certain of that." "What do you propose then?" Chancellor Ashel asked. "That we surrender to a single ship?" No, Vesiator said. I propose that we learn more before we lose more soldiers. I propose we send our best intelligence officers to learn everything we can about human capability, human history, and this ship in particular. I want to know why they refused to name it. I want to know why they warned us not to try to learn its name ourselves. Humans do not act without reason. There is something here we do not yet understand, and until we understand it, throwing more ships at that single vessel will only mean losing more of our people. The chamber argued for 2 hours. In the end, the High Command agreed to a compromise. The main war effort would pause while intelligence teams gathered information, but smaller forces, probing raids meant to test the ship's limits without risking the main fleet, would continue. Vesiator left the chamber troubled. She did not believe raids would learn them anything except how many more soldiers they could afford to lose, but she was outvoted, and so the raids began. Over the next 2 months, the Kethra Dominion sent 7 separate probing forces against human positions near the border, each one testing something different. A stealth squadron tried to slip past human sensors and was detected before it came within 1,000,000 kilometers of any human world. A fast attack group tried to strike a lightly defended supply depot and found the depot's defenses far stronger than any spy report had suggested. A diplomatic vessel, sent under a flag of parley, was allowed to dock at a human station, and its crew was treated with what the report called unexpected courtesy, though the humans revealed nothing of military value. And twice more, the single unnamed ship appeared. Both times, it appeared exactly where a Kethra force threatened a human position that mattered, arriving without warning, from what the sensor logs called an unknown method of movement. Both times, it destroyed the Kethra force sent against it, without taking damage. Both times, it did not pursue the survivors who fled. It simply let them go, as if it had no interest in their deaths beyond what was needed to stop the attack. Word of the ship spread through the Kethra military, then through Kethra society, faster than any sensor could contain it. Soldiers who had never seen it themselves repeated stories from those who had. The stories grew stranger with each retelling. Some said the ship could not be seen except when it chose to be. Some said its weapons broke the laws of physics that every Kethra child learned in school. Some said it was not a machine at all, but something else, something that merely looked like a ship. A junior communications officer, without any order to do so, began referring to it in a private message to a friend as the Nameless One, afraid to use even a guess at what the humans might call it. The name spread. Within weeks, most of the Kethra military spoke of the Nameless One, the way old sailors on Earth's oceans once spoke of storms they dared not name aloud, as though naming it wrongly might draw its attention. Vesiator heard this and called Isvren, the young officer who had survived the first encounter, to her office. "Do you believe in this superstition?" she asked him. "This idea that naming the ship is dangerous?" Isvren considered the question carefully before answering. "I do not believe in curses, Marshal, but I have watched the recording of what it did to 40 of our ships. I have read the human message, telling us not to try to learn its name, phrased not as an order, but as a warning for our own good. I do not think the humans are superstitious people. I think they know something about that ship that we do not, and their warning was honest." Vesiator nodded slowly. "Then find out what it is. I am giving you command of a new intelligence division. Your task is simple to say and hard to do. Learn everything you can about human history, about their capabilities, and about why they built a ship they refused to name and warned us never to seek its name ourselves. I do not want more raids. I do not want more dead soldiers thrown at a wall we cannot see through. I want understanding." Isvren accepted the assignment. He did not know, as he left her office that day, that his search would take him into the depths of human history, back to a war fought on Earth itself nearly 2 centuries earlier, and to a truth about humanity that the Kethra Dominion, and every other species that had met humans since, had never fully understood. He did not know that the ship without a name carried inside its systems something that even most humans did not fully understand either, something built not from steel and weapons, but from the memory of a species that had once nearly destroyed itself, and had sworn never to let that horror loose again, unless there was no other choice left. He only knew that the war was far from over, and that somewhere out among the stars, a single ship was waiting, patient and quiet, to answer the next threat against the people it had been built to protect. While Isvren began his research into human history, life across the Kethra Dominion slowly adjusted to the reality of a war that had, until now, felt distant to most ordinary citizens. News of the battle at New Delhi Station reached every corner of Kethra space within days, carried by traders and travelers faster than any official government report could manage. Public opinion, once confident that the Dominion's vast fleet would end the conflict quickly, began to shift toward uncertainty, and in some quarters, quiet fear. In the capital city of Kethra Prime, families of the soldiers lost in the failed strike against the Nameless One held small private memorials, since the government had not yet decided how to publicly address a defeat so total and so strange. Children in schools began asking their teachers questions about the humans that no lesson plan had prepared for. Newspapers and broadcast channels, usually careful to follow the tone set by official statements, began running stories that speculated wildly about what kind of weapon could destroy 40 ships without taking a single hit in return. Some of the speculation bordered on legend. One popular broadcast suggested the ship was crewed not by humans at all, but by something the humans themselves feared, kept contained, and controlled only by the ship's systems. Another claimed the vessel was not one ship, but many, capable of existing in more than one place at once, which was why sightings had been reported in more than one system on the same day, though official Kethra military records showed no such thing. The truth, stranger, and more grounded than any of the rumors, remained known only to a small circle within the high command, and even they did not yet understand it fully. Grand Marshal Vesia Tor found herself, in the weeks following the battle, spending long hours not in strategy meetings, but in quiet reflection, turning over the sensor recordings again and again, searching for some detail she might have missed. She had built her entire career on a simple principle: know your enemy before you engage them. For the first time in 30 years, she found herself commanding a war against an enemy she did not know at all, and the not knowing troubled her more than any battlefield loss ever had. It was this discomfort, more than any official order, that led her to grant Isvren the resources and authority he needed to dig as deeply into human history as any Kethra officer ever had. She did not fully believe, at first, that history alone could explain a weapon capable of what she had witnessed, but she had run out of other ideas, and she trusted the instincts of the young officer who had survived that first terrible encounter and returned with more questions than fear. Isvren spent his first month as head of the new intelligence division, doing something the Kethra Dominion had never done seriously before: reading human history, not as a list of dates and treaties, but as a story of who humans actually were. It was harder than he expected. Human records were scattered across thousands of languages, most of them old and no longer spoken, and human history stretched back further in complicated detail than the Kethra had assumed when they first met humans 20 years earlier. The Kethra Dominion had judged Earth by its current fleet size and its 9 colonized systems, and had decided this made humans a young, weak species. Isvren began to suspect this judgment had been a serious mistake. He requested access to human public records, the kind any Kethra citizen could read if they cared to look, and found a strange history of war after war fought not against aliens, but against each other. Humans, it seemed, had spent most of their history fighting among their own kind, nation against nation, over land, over belief, over resources. Isvren found this troubling at first. A species that fought itself so often seemed dangerous and unstable. But as he read further, he found something else. Roughly 200 years before first contact with the Kethra Dominion, humans had fought a war unlike any before it. The records called it, in different languages, by different names, but the meaning was close to the same in each: the final war, or sometimes, the last war of man. The details were kept behind higher levels of clearance than Isvren first had access to. He requested more clearance from Vesia Tor, and after some argument with the high command about the cost, she granted it. What he found changed how he understood the ship without a name. 200 years before the Kethra Dominion ever detected a human signal, Earth's nations had built weapons capable of ending all life on the planet many times over. Not conventional weapons, not even the crude nuclear weapons that early human records mentioned. By the time of the final war, human science had developed methods of destruction that could unmake matter itself across huge distances, weapons that could turn a city, then a country, then a continent, into nothing at all. The war began, as wars often do, with a smaller conflict that grew out of control. Two human nations, each convinced the other planned a first strike, began exchanging weapons faster than either side could stop. Other nations joined, some out of alliance, some out of fear of being caught unprepared. Within 6 months, what began as a regional conflict had become a war that touched every corner of the planet. By the time it ended, 3 billion humans were dead. Whole nations had ceased to exist. Not just their governments, but their people, their cities, their history. Gone in fire and radiation and the slow poison of ruined land and air. Human records described the years that followed as the long winter, when ash in the sky blocked the sun and crops failed across what remained of the world, and millions more died of starvation who had survived the war itself. Isvren read the numbers again and again, unable to fully understand them. The Kethra Dominion's worst war, fought 2 centuries earlier against a rival power called the Doskal Remnant, had cost 12 million Kethra lives across a decade of fighting, and Kethra history still spoke of it as the darkest chapter of their civilization. 3 billion. Isvren tried to imagine a number that large, and found he could not. But the number was not the part of the record that stayed with him the longest. It was what came after. When the final war ended, not because either side won, but because there was almost nothing left worth fighting for, the surviving human nations came together and made a choice that Isvren found almost impossible to believe a species capable of such violence could make. They chose to remember. Not to hide the war, not to erase it from their history and pretend it away, the way some records suggested certain governments had tried to do with darker moments before. They built monuments in the ruins of the worst-hit cities, and they left some ruins, exactly as the war had left them, untouched, so that no future human could forget what had happened. They wrote the full history of the war into every school's teaching, in every human nation, and made sure that every human child, no matter where they were born, learned exactly how close their species had come to destroying itself entirely. And they made a promise. It was not written into any single treaty, because by then, there was only one human government left, formed from the ashes of dozens of broken ones, united not by conquest, but by a shared understanding that division had nearly ended them. The promise was simple, and Isvren found a version of it carved, according to the records, into a black stone monument at the center of a city called Geneva, rebuilt from the war's rubble. Never again shall we turn this power upon ourselves. Never again shall pride and fear be worth the price we paid. But should another force threaten what remains of us, we will not hesitate to become again what we swore never to be, that our children might live in peace. Isvren read the words a dozen times, translated through 3 layers of language into Kethra script, and felt something he had not expected to feel while researching an enemy. He felt cold. He understood now. The ship without a name was not humanity's greatest weapon shown off with pride. It was humanity's greatest shame, kept in careful reserve, brought out only because the Kethra Dominion had killed 8 of their people and refused to answer for it. The humans had not sent an army to this war because they did not need one. They had built something else entirely, born from the worst chapter of their own history, and they had promised themselves, in stone, that they would use it again only if there was no other way to protect what they had left. He began to understand why the humans had warned the Kethra Dominion not to seek the ship's name. It was not superstition, it was something closer to mercy, as if speaking its name aloud might be the thing that convinced it, or whatever controlled it, that the threat was serious enough to answer without limit. Isvren brought his findings to Vesiator in person, refusing to send them through any communication channel that might be intercepted or copied without full context. He sat across from her in her private office and told her everything. The final war, the 3 billion dead, the promise carved in black stone, and his theory about what the ship truly was. Vesiator listened without interrupting, her pale blue face unreadable in the way of experienced Kethra officers. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You believe this ship is connected to that old war," she finally said. "That it carries some remnant of the weapons they built to destroy themselves 2 centuries ago." "I believe it is more than that, Marshal," Isvren said. "I believe the humans built this ship, and perhaps others like it that we have not yet seen, specifically because of what they learned from that war. A species that nearly destroyed itself learns things about destruction that no other species has had reason to learn. I believe when they say they do not want us to learn the ship's name, They mean it as a genuine warning, not a threat. Names carry weight for humans, more than they do for us. I found records suggesting they name very few of their most dangerous things at all, and the ones they do name, they name with great care, almost as though the naming itself is a kind of commitment. A commitment to what? I do not know for certain, Marshal. But I believe it may be a commitment to how far the ship, or its systems, are willing to go. I believe an unnamed weapon may still hold something back. I fear a named one might not. Vesiator considered this for a long time, before speaking again. This changes what we are facing. If you are right, then this is not a war we can win by throwing more ships at the problem. Every raid we have sent has been destroyed. Every raid has, perhaps, moved us closer to whatever line makes the humans decide this ship must stop holding back. That is my fear as well, Marshal. Then what do you recommend? Isvren had thought about this question for days before coming to her office. I recommend we stop the raids entirely. I recommend we open direct communication with the human government, not through formal channels demanding surrender or apology, but through channels asking to understand what they actually want from this war. I do not believe the humans want to destroy the Kethra Dominion, Marshal. I believe, if we had simply given them the captain responsible for the deaths at their outpost when they first asked, none of this would have happened. I believe they still want that captain, or a resolution close to it. I do not believe they want billions of Kethra dead the way billions of humans once died in their own history. Vesiator was silent again. Then she stood, walked to the window of her office, and looked out over the capital city of Kethra Prime, its towers lit gold in the evening light. I will bring this to the High Command, she said. I do not know if they will listen. Chancellor Ashel believes that showing any willingness to negotiate now will look like weakness, after we have already lost so many ships. There are voices calling for a larger fleet, a full mobilization, an attempt to overwhelm the humans through sheer numbers before this ship, or others like it, can be built or deployed in greater force. With respect, Marshal, I believe that would be a mistake. I agree with you, Vesiator said. But agreement is not the same as votes in the High Command chamber. The High Command meeting 3 days later did not go as Vesiator hoped. Isvren's report was heard in full, and several members of the council seemed genuinely troubled by what he described. But Chancellor Ashal, backed by General Karth Doiv and 3 other seats, argued that a species capable of the horror Isvren described in their own history was exactly the kind of enemy that could not be trusted to negotiate honestly. If this species nearly destroyed itself once, who is to say they will not simply destroy us instead, negotiation or not? Ashal argued. We cannot base our strategy on the hope that an enemy who has already killed 40 of our ships without losing a single vessel of their own is secretly reluctant to use their full power. I say we must show strength, not offer weakness disguised as understanding. The vote went against Vesiator and Isvren, 5-6. The High Command approved a full mobilization. The entire Kethra battle fleet, 12,000 ships, would be gathered and sent in a single overwhelming force against the human systems nearest the border, beginning with New Delhi Station, the target the Third Fleet had failed to reach months before. Vesiator left the chamber that night knowing, with a certainty that sat cold in her chest, that this decision would cost more Kethra lives than any single choice in her 30 years of service. She found Isvren waiting outside the chamber doors. They voted for mobilization, she told him. I feared they would, he said quietly. I want you to continue your work, she said. If this war is coming regardless of what either of us wishes, then I want to understand our enemy better than any Kethra commander in history has understood an enemy before. Perhaps that understanding will save lives yet, even if it cannot stop what is already set in motion. Isvren nodded, though his expression carried little hope. I will continue, Marshal, but I fear what we are about to learn will come at a terrible price. In the weeks that followed the High Command's vote, Isvren tried one more time to change the course events had already taken. He requested, and was granted, permission to send a personal message through diplomatic channels to the human government, separate from any official Kethra communication. He did not know if anyone with real authority would ever read it, but he felt he owed it to the soldiers who would soon be ordered into battle to try. He wrote plainly, without the formal language Kethra officials usually used in official messages. He explained what he had learned of the final war, and told the humans honestly that he believed most of the Kethra High Command did not understand what they were preparing to face. He asked, on behalf of no one but himself, whether there was still a path to peace before the mobilization was complete. A reply came back 9 days later, not from any high official, but from a name he did not recognize, Captain Elena Reyes. It was short, and it stayed with him for the rest of the war. Marshal Vren, thank you for your honesty. I have read your message myself. I want you to know that nothing that follows will happen because we wanted it to. My people do not want more war, any more than yours does. But we will defend what is ours, and we will defend it fully, if that is what is required of us. I hope, for the sake of both our peoples, that your leaders reconsider before that becomes necessary. If they do not, please know that this ship, and everyone aboard it, will try to end this as quickly and with as little loss as such a thing can ever be ended. Isvren read the message many times over the following days. He did not share its full contents with Vesiator at first, uncertain what to make of a personal reply from the very captain whose ship had already destroyed dozens of Kethra vessels. But eventually he brought it to her, and she read it in silence, then set it down on her desk with the same careful stillness she showed in the high command chamber. She sounds almost apologetic, Vesiator said quietly, as if she regrets what is coming as much as we do. I believe she does, Marshal. I do not believe humans enjoy this war. I believe they simply will not lose it, if losing means losing what remains to them after everything they suffered 2 centuries ago. He was right to fear it. 12,000 Kethra warships, carrying nearly 3 million soldiers, began gathering at the border in the weeks that followed, the largest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled in its history. Shipyards across a dozen systems worked without rest, repairing older vessels and rushing new ones through final construction. Soldiers who had never expected to see real combat found themselves called up from reserve postings, given only weeks of additional training before being assigned to the growing fleet. Among the ordinary Kethra citizens, opinion on the coming battle was divided. Some believed, as Chancellor Ashel and General Karth Doiv did, that overwhelming force was the only sensible answer to an enemy who had already proven dangerous beyond anything the Dominion had faced before. Others, having heard the growing stories of the Nameless One and its strange, almost gentle refusal to pursue fleeing survivors, wondered privately whether this was a war that could be won through numbers at all, or whether the Dominion was simply marching toward a disaster it did not yet understand. Vesiator herself was given formal command of the mobilized fleet, a decision the High Command made not out of confidence in her strategy, which they had largely ignored, but because no other commander in Kethra history had faced the human vessel and survived to lead again. She accepted the command, though privately she told Isfren she felt as though she had been asked to lead soldiers toward a battle she had already warned them not to fight. And somewhere beyond the border, in human space, word reached a small, quiet crew aboard a ship without a name, that the Kethra Dominion had chosen not peace, but overwhelming force. The ship did not panic. It did not call for reinforcements. It simply began, calmly and without hurry, to prepare. The ship without a name was called, by the handful of humans who served aboard it, simply, the vessel. Or sometimes, among the crew who had served longest, Old Girl, though never in any official record. Its true designation existed in only one place, a sealed file inside Earth's highest defense command, accessible to fewer than a dozen living humans, and even most of those had never opened it. Its captain was a woman named Elena Reyes, 51 years old, who had served in Earth's small defense fleet for over 20 years, before being given command of the vessel 8 years earlier. She did not think of herself as special. She had simply been the officer with the right record, the right temperament, and the willingness to accept a command that came with a warning most officers refused to hear twice. This ship is not like the others, the admiral who offered her the post had told her. It was not built to fight wars, the way our other ships fight wars. It was built as a promise kept in metal and code, a promise our species made to itself after the final war. You will command it, but you will never fully own it. Part of it will always answer to something older than either of us. Do you accept? Elena Reyes had thought about the black stone monument in Geneva, which she had visited as a child on a school trip, the way every human child eventually did. She remembered standing before the carved words and feeling, even at 10 years old, the full weight of what her species had almost done to itself. She had accepted the command without hesitation, because she understood, in a way words could not fully capture, exactly what the ship was for. Her crew numbered only 40, remarkably small for a vessel of the vessel's power. Most of them had served with her for years. They did not think of themselves as heroes, or as humanity's secret weapon. They thought of themselves as caretakers, tending something dangerous and necessary, hoping every day that they would never need to use its full capability. When word reached the vessel that the Kethra Dominion had mobilized its entire fleet, 12,000 ships, toward New Delhi Station, Elena Reyes read the intelligence report twice in her quarters, before calling her senior officers together. 12,000 ships, said her first officer, a quiet man named David Okoro, who had served with her for 6 years. That is more than 5 times what we destroyed in every engagement combined so far. They are done testing us, Elena said. They have decided that overwhelming numbers is the only answer left. I understand why they believe that. From their perspective, it may even be the only strategy that makes sense. Do we call for the fleet? Okoro asked. Earth still maintained its own conventional navy, nearly 2,000 ships, though none of them approached the vessel's individual power. Elena considered this for a long moment. No, she finally said. If our conventional fleet engages 12,000 Kethra warships directly, we will lose most of it, and many good people will die for very little gain. This is what the vessel exists for. We will meet them alone, as we have every time before. 12,000 ships against one, Captain, said her weapons officer, a young lieutenant named Priya Sharma, her voice carefully neutral but her concern evident. Even our systems have limits. They do, Elena agreed. And if this battle requires us to go past what we have used before, then the decision of how far we go is not mine alone to make. You all know the protocols. You all know what activating full capability means, and what it does not mean. I will not make that choice lightly, and I will not make it without every one of you understanding exactly what we are choosing. The bridge fell quiet. Every person present had trained for this moment, had studied the protocols, had signed the acknowledgments required of anyone who served aboard the vessel. But training and understanding were different things from the reality of facing 12,000 enemy ships and knowing that the next choice they made could echo for generations. Set a course for New Delhi Station, Elena finally said. We will be there before they are. I would rather choose the ground we stand on than let them choose it for us. New Delhi Station was Earth's largest shipyard beyond the home system, a vast construction of metal and light built into the rings of a gas giant 3 systems from Earth itself. Nearly 200,000 humans lived and worked there, building and repairing ships, training new crew, running the industry that kept Earth's young colonies growing. It was not a military target in the traditional sense. It was a home. Elena Reyes had visited the station many times over her career. She knew families there, had eaten dinner in the station's markets, had watched children play in its low-gravity parks. When the vessel arrived at the edge of the system, 3 days ahead of the Kethra fleet's projected arrival, she requested a private channel with the station's governor, a woman named Amara Osei. They are sending everything, Elena told her. 12,000 ships. I need you to begin evacuation procedures immediately, and I need you to understand that I cannot promise this station will still be standing when this is finished. Governor Osei's face on the screen was calm, though Elena could see the effort it took to keep it that way. How long do we have? 3 days, perhaps less if they push their engines harder than expected. That is not enough time to evacuate 200,000 people, Captain. I know, Elena said quietly. Evacuate who you can, priority to children, to the elderly, to anyone who cannot fight or work in the defense of the station. I will do everything in my power to make sure this fight never reaches the station itself. But I need you to prepare for the possibility that it does. Governor Osei nodded slowly. I trust you, Captain. Earth trusts you. That is why they gave you this ship. Do what you must. The words settled heavily on Elena's shoulders as the channel closed. She had heard variations of that sentence many times in her 8 years commanding the vessel, and it never grew lighter to carry. The evacuation began immediately. Thousands of transport ships carrying civilians towards safer systems deeper in human space. It was not enough time to move everyone, but Governor Osei and her staff worked without rest, prioritizing exactly as Elena had asked. By the time Kethra sensors detected the first signs of the approaching fleet, nearly 60,000 civilians had been moved to safety, with more transports leaving every hour. The vessel positioned itself at the outer edge of the system, alone, waiting. Aboard the lead ship of the Kethra fleet, Grand Marshal Vesia Tor stood on her flagship's bridge and watched the sensor readings confirm what she already expected. The single human vessel was there, exactly where their intelligence suggested it would be, standing between 12,000 Kethra warships and the shipyard it existed to protect. "One ship," said General Karthdoiv, standing beside her, his voice carrying the confidence of a commander who believed overwhelming numbers solved every problem. "Whatever weapon it carries, whatever strange method it uses to avoid our fire, it cannot stand against 12,000 ships firing as one. We will overwhelm its systems, whatever they are, through sheer volume." Vesia Tor said nothing. She had read Isvran's report in full. She understood, in a way Karthdoiv did not seem to, that they were not simply facing a powerful weapon. They were facing the physical memory of a war that had once killed 3 billion humans, deployed now by a species that had sworn never to let such destruction loose again, except as an absolute last resort. She feared, more than she feared losing this battle, what might happen if the Kethra Dominion pushed hard enough to make that last resort feel necessary. "Signal the fleet," Karthdoiv ordered. "All ships, prepare for full engagement. We end this today." 12,000 Kethra warships began their advance. Aboard the vessel, Elena Reyes watched the same sensor readings from the opposite side, 12,000 red markers spreading across her tactical display like a wave about to break. "Captain," Priya Sharma said quietly from the weapons station, "they are entering engagement range in 4 minutes." Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the display. She thought, briefly, of the black stone monument in Geneva, of the words carved into it that she had read as a child and had carried with her every day since taking command of this ship. "Never again shall we turn this power upon ourselves. But should another force threaten what remains of us, we will not hesitate to become again what we swore never to be, that our children might live in peace." She thought of the 60,000 civilians who had made it to safety, and the 140,000 who had not, still aboard New Delhi Station, trusting that her ship would be enough to protect them. She thought of the Kethra soldiers aboard those 12,000 ships, most of them, she knew from Isvran's own intelligence reports which had somehow found their way, through careful channels, into human hands, following orders from a government that had chosen force over the negotiation their own commander had recommended. They were not evil. They were soldiers, doing what soldiers did, caught in a war that neither side had truly wanted, born from a single tragic accident, and a captain's panicked decision to hide his mistake with violence. "David," she said quietly to her first officer, "prepare the standard engagement protocols. We answer proportionally. We destroy only what threatens the station directly. We give them every chance to withdraw before we go further than that." "And if they do not withdraw, Captain?" Okoro asked, though he already knew the answer, because they had trained for this moment for years. "Then we go further," Elena said, "one step at a time. Never further than the threat requires. That is the promise this ship was built to keep, and I will not break it, no matter how many ships they send against us." Before the vessel began its final approach to New Delhi Station, Elena Reyes gathered her crew one last time in the ship's small briefing room, a space barely large enough to hold all 40 of them standing together. It was a custom she followed before every major engagement, one she had inherited from the captain who trained her, and one she intended to pass on to whoever eventually took her place. "I will not pretend this will be easy," she told them. 12,000 ships is more than we have ever faced, more than this ship has ever been tested against in its entire service history. I have read every simulation our systems can generate, and I will tell you honestly that some of those simulations do not end well for us. But I have also read the alternative. If we do not stand here, this fleet reaches New Delhi Station in 3 days, and 200,000 people become an acceptable loss in someone else's war plan. I do not accept that, and I do not think any of you do either." She looked around the room at the faces she had come to know so well over years of service together. Priya Sharma, barely 30 years old, who had joined the crew straight from the academy and had grown into one of the finest weapons officers Elena had ever commanded. David Okoro, steady and thoughtful, who had turned down 2 promotions that would have taken him off this ship because he believed the work here mattered more than rank. Engineers, sensor operators, medical staff. each of them volunteers who had known exactly what kind of ship they were joining and had chosen it anyway. "I want to remind you all of something before we begin," Elena continued. "This ship was not built to prove how powerful humanity can be. It was built because we learned, at a cost none of us can fully imagine, what happens when power is used without restraint. Whatever happens today, whatever we are called upon to do, we do it because it is necessary, and we stop the moment it is no longer necessary. That has always been the promise of this ship, and it will remain the promise of this ship for as long as I command it." No one spoke for a long moment. Then Priya Sharma, quiet but steady, said what many of them were thinking. "We're with you, Captain. Whatever it takes to protect that station, and whatever it takes to make sure we never go one step further than we have to." Elena nodded, grateful for words she had not needed to ask for. "Then let's get to our stations. They'll be here soon." The crew dispersed to their duties, and Elena remained alone in the briefing room a few minutes longer, looking out through the small viewport at the distant lights of New Delhi Station, still visible even from this far out at the edge of the system. She thought about Governor Osei and the families she had met on her visits there over the years, and the particular weight of knowing that somewhere among those 200,000 people were children who had no idea how close their home had come to catastrophe, and, she hoped, never would. She thought too of the Kethra soldiers aboard the approaching fleet, most of them ordinary people following orders, many of them likely as uncertain about this war as she was. She did not hate them. She had read enough of Isfren's intercepted reports, quietly shared through careful diplomatic backchannels, to understand that at least some voices within the Kethra Dominion had argued against this very battle. War, she had learned over 20 years of service, was rarely a fight between clear enemies and clear friends. More often, it was a tragedy that swept up ordinary people on both sides, each side convinced they had no better choice. She returned to the bridge as the first sensor contacts appeared at the edge of detection range, 12,000 points of light spreading across the dark, like a slow, terrible sunrise. The Kethra fleet entered engagement range. 12,000 ships opened fire as one, a wall of light and destruction aimed at a single point in space, where one small human vessel waited, calm and unmoving, ready to answer. The battle for New Delhi Station had begun. 12,000 ships fired as one, and for the first time since the war began, something struck the vessel. It was not a killing blow. Elena Reyes felt the ship shudder around her, heard the low groan of stressed systems, watched 3 status lights on her display shift from green to amber. The sheer volume of fire, more than had ever been directed at the vessel in a single moment, had finally found what smaller numbers could not, a gap in its defenses, however small. "Shields at 91%, Priya Sharma reported, her voice tight but controlled. "No critical systems affected." "They found us," David Okoro said quietly, disbelief coloring his words. Every previous engagement, the vessel had come away untouched. This was new. 12,000 ships firing together, "We'll do that," Elena said, keeping her voice level for her crew's sake, though she felt the same surprise Okoro did. "Proportional response. Target the ships directly threatening the station's approach vector, nothing more." The vessel moved, that strange motion the Kethra sensors could never fully track, folding distance in a way that no Kethra scientist had yet explained. It appeared inside the leading edge of the Kethra formation, and its weapons opened fire, precise and controlled, targeting only the ships in a direct line toward New Delhi Station's outer defenses. 6 ships came apart in the first pass, their structures failing exactly as the 40 ships had failed in the very first engagement of the war. The vessel moved again, appearing at another point along the threatened approach vector, destroying 4 more ships before the Kethra fleet's own weapons could adjust to track it. But this time, the numbers told a different story than before. With 12,000 ships spread across the engagement zone, enough weapons fire filled the space around the vessel that some of it, by pure density if nothing else, began to connect. Each hit was small. Each hit chipped away, fraction by fraction, at the shields protecting the ship. Elena watched the percentage tick downward, slowly but steadily, and understood that for the first time, this battle had a clock running against her. "Marshal," Isfren said from his station aboard Vesiator's flagship, watching the same battle from the opposite perspective. "The enemy vessel is taking damage. Small amounts, but it is accumulating." Vesiator watched the tactical display with an expression that gave away nothing of what she felt inside. She had argued against this battle. She had warned the High Command that pushing the humans toward greater force would only invite greater force in return. But now that the battle had begun, some part of her, the part that had commanded fleets for 30 years, could not help but calculate the odds with cold precision. 12,000 ships. Even losing 10, 20, 50 ships for every point of damage they inflicted on the human vessel, the math eventually favored the larger number, if the larger number was willing to pay the price. Continue the engagement, General Karthdoiv ordered from beside her, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. It bleeds. Whatever it is, it bleeds. Concentrate fire from the northern and southern flanks. Squeeze it between two walls of fire. The order went out, and the battle grew worse. Aboard the vessel, Elena Reyes felt the strain building through every system she monitored. Shields at 82%. 76. The ship's automated defense systems worked without pause, tracking incoming fire and calculating response, with a speed no human mind could match. But even machine precision had limits when facing weapons fire from 12,000 directions at once. "Captain," Priya Sharma said, "we are being flanked. If they close the gap between the northern and southern groups, we will be caught in a crossfire we cannot fully evade." Elena studied the tactical display, watching the red markers slowly shift into a formation designed to trap her ship between two overwhelming walls of fire. She thought of the protocols she had trained on for 8 years, the careful steps that governed exactly how the vessel was meant to escalate its response, each step justified only by the threat that demanded it. Proportional response had held the line so far, destroying only the ships directly threatening the station, sparing the rest of the Kethra fleet from a fate the ship was fully capable of delivering. But proportional response assumed the threat itself remained limited. 12,000 ships, deliberately maneuvering to trap and destroy the only thing standing between them and a station full of civilians, was no longer a limited threat. "David," Elena said. "Casualty report from the station. Are the remaining transports still evacuating?" "Yes, Captain. 40,000 more civilians moved to safety since the battle began. 100,000 still aboard the station." Elena closed her eyes for one brief moment. She thought again of the monument in Geneva, of the promise carved into black stone by a generation of humans who had buried 3 billion of their own dead and sworn never to let such horror happen again, unless there was truly no other way. She opened her eyes and looked at her crew, each of them watching her, waiting. "Step 2, she said quietly. "We are authorized. Prepare full defensive escalation. I want it clear in every log that this fleet was given the chance to withdraw, that this station holds 100,000 civilians who did nothing to deserve what is coming toward them, and that we acted only because the alternative was allowing that harm to happen. Do you all understand?" "Understood, Captain," came the reply, from each station in turn, voices steady, despite what they all knew was coming. What happened next was recorded by every sensor aboard every surviving Kethra ship, and the recordings would be studied by Kethra scientists for years afterward, unable to fully explain what they had witnessed. The vessel stopped moving between targets one at a time. Instead, something changed in the pattern of energy readings surrounding the ship, a shift that Kethra instruments struggled to properly measure, as though the ship had reached past the boundaries of normal physics that governed every other vessel in the battle. A wave of light, silent and terrible, spread outward from the vessel in every direction at once. It did not move like a weapon. It moved like something closer to a natural law being enforced, an idea given form, sweeping across the battlefield faster than any ship could evade. Wherever it passed, Kethra warships did not explode. They simply stopped. Their weapons went dark. Their engines fell silent. Their systems, every one of them, from the smallest sensor to the largest weapon battery, ceased to function, as though something had reached into the fundamental workings of each ship and gently, without violence, turned it off. The wave passed through 3,000 ships in the space of a few seconds, and when it had finished, 3,000 Kethra warships drifted silent and powerless in the dark, their crews alive, but their ships no longer capable of fighting at all. On Vesiator's flagship, every system flickered and died at once. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, dim red glow replacing the bright white of normal operation. Life support remained, barely, but weapons, engines, and shields were entirely gone. "What, General Karthdoiv said into the sudden quiet of the bridge, his voice shaking for the first time since Vesia Tor had known him. Was that? Isvren, standing near the tactical station, found he could not speak at all. He had spent months studying human history, trying to understand what the vessel might truly be capable of. He had read about the final war, about weapons that could unmake matter across continents. He had theorized, in his reports to Vesia Tor, that the ship carried some remnant of that terrible capability, held carefully in reserve. He had not imagined this. Not violence, not destruction on the scale the final war had once brought to Earth itself, but something else entirely. A demonstration of restraint so absolute that it was, in its own way, more frightening than any weapon could have been. The vessel had not killed 3,000 crews. It had simply, and completely, removed their ability to continue the fight, as easily as a person might turn off a light switch. Marshal, Isvren finally managed to say, I do not believe that was their full capability. I believe that was a choice. A very deliberate, very careful choice. Vesia Tor stared at the dead controls before her, understanding settling over her with the weight of everything she had feared since first watching the recording from New Delhi Station months earlier. They could have killed us all, she said quietly. 3,000 ships, tens of thousands of soldiers, and instead, they simply stopped us. Yes, Marshal. Signal the remaining fleet, Vesia Tor said, her voice carrying an authority that cut through the fear in the room. All ships still capable of movement. Withdraw immediately. We are done here. Marshal, we still outnumber them, Karthdoiv began, though his protest carried none of its earlier confidence. Look at what is left of our northern and southern flanks, General, Vesia Tor said sharply. 3,000 ships disabled in seconds, and that vessel has not fired a single weapon that killed a living soul. I do not know what it will do if we continue to press this attack, and I am no longer willing to find out. We withdraw, now. The order went out across what remained of the Kethra fleet, 9,000 ships still capable of movement, pulling back from New Delhi Station in a retreat that carried none of the order or discipline the Kethra military prided itself on. It was simply an escape, ships scattering in every direction, desperate to put distance between themselves and the single vessel that had, in a matter of minutes, disabled a fifth of their entire attacking force without spilling a drop of blood. Aboard the vessel, Elena Reyes watched the Kethra fleet withdraw, her hands finally unclenching from the edge of her command console. The battle had lasted less than 30 minutes from beginning to end. 3,000 Kethra ships drifted disabled in the space around New Delhi Station, their crews alive and unharmed, waiting to be recovered by whatever rescue effort the retreating fleet could organize. Shields at 41%, Priya Sharma reported. Damage report shows significant strain on primary systems, but nothing critical. We held, Captain. Casualties? Elena asked. None aboard the vessel, David Okoro said. And Captain, New Delhi Station reports 0 civilian casualties. The evacuation, combined with your restraint and targeting, meant the fighting never reached the station itself. Elena allowed herself a slow breath, the tension of the last 30 minutes finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. Signal Governor Ose. Tell her the immediate threat has passed, though I expect it will take some time before we know if the Kethra Dominion intends to try again. Yes, Captain. Elena leaned back in her chair, looking at the tactical display now showing the scattered, retreating Kethra fleet, and the 3,000 disabled ships left behind. She thought of the choice she had made, the escalation she had authorized, and the restraint she had held on to, even in the moment of using it. She had not killed anyone. She had stopped a threat, exactly as far as the threat required, and no further. She thought, too, of what would come next. Word of what had happened here would reach not just the Kethra Dominion, but every species that had ever heard rumors of humanity's unnamed ship. She wondered if this battle would be the one that finally ended the war, or simply the one that made the next escalation, should it ever come, that much harder to hold back from. Captain, Okoro said quietly, incoming transmission. It's Marshal Vesia Tor, requesting a direct channel. Elena straightened in her chair. Put her through. The screen flickered to life, showing the pale blue face of the Kethra commander, her expression carrying none of the arrogance Elena had expected from Isvren's reports of the Dominion's earlier confidence. Instead, Vesia Tor looked like someone who had just seen something that had changed, permanently, how she understood the galaxy around her. Captain, Vesiator said, her translated voice carrying through the vessel's bridge. I am formally requesting terms for a ceasefire, pending full negotiation with my government. I believe, after what I have witnessed today, that continuing this war serves no purpose except further loss on both sides. Elena studied the Kethra commander's face for a long moment before answering. I will forward your request to Earth's government immediately, Marshal. For what it's worth, I believe that is the right decision. May I ask you something, Captain, before this channel closes? You may ask. I cannot promise an answer. Vesiator hesitated, then spoke the question that had haunted her, and every officer under her command, since the very first encounter months earlier. The name of your ship. We were warned never to seek it. I no longer wish to know it out of curiosity, Captain. I wish to know, simply, if there is a reason beyond superstition that we were warned away from it. Elena Reyes considered the question carefully before answering, aware that whatever she said next would likely be remembered and repeated throughout Kethra space for generations to come. There is a reason, Marshal, she finally said, but it is not one I can explain in a single conversation, and I am not certain it is mine to explain at all. I will say only this. My people learned, at a terrible cost, that some things are more dangerous named than unnamed. Perhaps, if peace holds between our peoples, you will understand that reason more fully one day. For now, I hope it is enough that you understand this ship exists, to protect, not to destroy, and that today, it did exactly that, and nothing more. Vesiator was quiet for a long moment, studying the human captain's face across the distance between their two ships. Thank you, Captain, she finally said. I believe I understand more than you think I do. The channel closed, and Elena Reyes sat alone on her ship's bridge, surrounded by her crew, looking out at a battlefield that had, against every expectation, ended without a single death. She did not know yet whether this ceasefire would hold, or whether the Kethra High Command would accept Vesiator's judgment over the louder voices calling for continued war. But for the first time since the war had begun, she allowed herself to hope that the promise carved into black stone in Geneva might be kept a little longer, that the terrible power her ship carried might once again go unused in its fullest form, held in careful reserve for a threat that, she prayed, would never truly come. The ceasefire held, though not without struggle on the Kethra side. When Vesiator returned to Kethra Prime with the survivors of her fleet and the recordings of what had happened at New Delhi Station, the High Command chamber that had once voted for full mobilization now sat in stunned and uneasy silence. Chancellor Renashal, who had argued most strongly for overwhelming force, watched the sensor recordings of 3,000 ships going dark in seconds, their crews alive but powerless, and said nothing for a long time after the footage ended. You said this species nearly destroyed itself once, General Karthdoiv finally said, his voice quieter than Vesiator had ever heard it. You said it as a reason to distrust them. I wonder now if it should have been a reason to fear them properly from the very beginning. It should have been a reason to listen, Vesiator said. Marshal Vren warned this council months ago that we were dealing with something we did not understand. I warned this council that pushing them toward greater force would only teach us how much force they were willing to use. We are fortunate, more fortunate than we deserve, that their captain chose restraint, even when given every reason not to. The vote to formally end hostilities and open true negotiations passed without a single voice raised against it. Chancellor Ashel, humbled in a way none of his colleagues had seen from him before, personally requested that Isvren, still only a junior officer by rank, be included in the negotiating delegation sent to Earth. You understood them before any of us did, Ashel told him. I would rather have your judgment in that room than my own pride. The negotiations took place not on Earth itself, but aboard a neutral station in the border region where the war had begun, a fitting choice, given that a single mistaken mining operation had started everything nearly a year earlier. Isvren traveled as part of the Kethra delegation and found himself, on the second day of talks, face to face, for the first time, with Elena Reyes, the woman whose ship had ended a battle involving 12,000 vessels without taking a single life. She did not look, to his eyes, like someone who commanded the most feared weapon the Kethra Dominion had ever encountered. She looked tired, and careful, and entirely ordinary in the way she carried herself, speaking with quiet directness rather than any show of power. Marshal Vren, she said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting, that he had read about, but never before experienced. I've read your reports. Or rather, I've read summaries of them. Our intelligence services were quite impressed with how quickly you understood us. Not quickly enough, Captain, Isfren said. I understood in time to advise against the mobilization, but not in time to prevent it. 3,000 of our crews owe their lives to your restraint, not to my understanding. Understanding matters, Elena said. It's the reason we're sitting here now, instead of continuing to fight. I'd rather end a war through understanding than through force, every time it's possible. Force is only ever the last option, not the first one. They spoke for nearly an hour that day, formal negotiations aside, simply exchanging perspective on how the war had unfolded from each side. Isfren asked, carefully, about the final war, about the promise carved into the monument in Geneva, about whether his theories on why the ship went unnamed had been correct. Elena considered her answer carefully before speaking. I can tell you this much, since I believe you've earned honest answers through your work these past months. My people built ships like mine after the final war, not as weapons to use against others, but as a promise to ourselves that we would never again let violence spiral beyond our control, whether against each other or against anyone else. Every captain who commands a ship like the vessel trains for years not in how to destroy, but in how to hold back, how to answer only exactly what is needed and no more. The name is kept quiet because names, for humans, carry weight and history. A named thing becomes a symbol, and symbols get used, get spoken of carelessly, get invoked in moments of fear or anger, without full thought behind them. We did not want this ship to become a symbol, wielded by frightened people, demanding its full power be unleashed at the first sign of trouble. We wanted it to remain, as much as possible, a quiet last resort, used only by those who had trained to understand exactly what using it should cost. Isfren nodded slowly, understanding settling fully into place for the first time since he had begun this research months earlier. Then the warning you gave us, not to seek its name. It was never a threat at all. No, Elena said. It was an honest kindness, offered to people we did not yet know well enough to trust, but did not wish to see harmed unnecessarily either. I am glad, Marshal Vren, that we did not have to learn whether that kindness would have been enough to prevent everything that followed. The formal treaty took another 2 weeks to complete, negotiated in detail by diplomats and legal representatives from both governments, but the core of it was simple, and closely followed what Isfren had recommended to Vesia Tor, many months before the war's worst battle had even been fought. The Kethra captain responsible for the original attack on the human mining outpost was surrendered for trial, under a jointly agreed process, found guilty by a panel including judges from both species, and sentenced according to terms both governments found acceptable. Reparations were paid, not as punishment, but as acknowledgement of harm done. Borders were redrawn with updated, accurate maps, so that no future accident like the one that started the war could happen through simple ignorance of where one territory ended and another began. And slowly, cautiously, trade and communication began to open between the Kethra Dominion and Earth, not as conquered and conqueror, but as two wary powers who had fought a brief and terrible war and had chosen, in the end, understanding over continued destruction. Vesia Tor retired from active command 2 years after the war's end, her reputation transformed from a commander who had led the largest mobilization in Kethra history into a symbol, ironically, of restraint and wisdom in the face of overwhelming pressure to escalate. She spent her final years advising the Kethra government on relations with Earth and became, by all accounts, one of the strongest voices arguing for continued peace whenever tensions rose between the two powers in the years that followed. Isfren remained in the intelligence division he had built, now formally renamed the Office of Cross-Species Understanding, tasked not just with studying humans, but with studying every species the Kethra Dominion encountered from that point forward, with an eye toward understanding before judging, listening before acting. He often told his junior officers the same lesson he had learned firsthand, that a species judged only by the size of its visible fleet, or the number of its colonies, could hide depths of history and capability that no simple count of ships could ever reveal. Elena Reyes continued to command the vessel for 6 more years after the war with the Kethra Dominion ended, though the ship was never again called upon to use anything close to the full escalation it had shown at New Delhi Station. She retired eventually to a quiet coastal town on Earth, not far from where she had grown up, and rarely spoke publicly about her years commanding humanity's most secretive and feared vessel. But every year, on the anniversary of the ceasefire that ended the HFY War, she traveled to Geneva and stood before the Black Stone Monument at the heart of the rebuilt city, reading again the words carved there nearly 200 years before her own birth. Never again shall we turn this power upon ourselves. Never again shall pride and fear be worth the price we paid. But should another force threaten what remains of us, we will not hesitate to become again what we swore never to be, that our children might live in peace. She thought, each time she read it, of the 3,000 HFY crews who had lived, because she had chosen restraint, even in the moment of using humanity's most terrible capability. She thought of the 100,000 civilians aboard New Delhi Station who had never learned how close they had come to catastrophe, saved by careful evacuation, and a captain's determination to hold the line exactly where it needed to be held, no further. She thought, too, of the ship itself, still serving somewhere out among the stars, under a new captain she had trained personally, still carrying no name that any government beyond a handful of trusted hands would ever know, still standing as a quiet promise that humanity's darkest history would never again become its future, unless there was truly no other choice left at all. The war with the HFY Dominion became, in the years that followed, a story told throughout known space, growing and changing with each retelling, the way stories always do. Some versions emphasized the terrible power the ship had shown. Some versions emphasized the restraint. Among the HFY, the ship remained, even decades later, a thing spoken of carefully, respectfully, and rarely by any name at all, out of habits formed in genuine fear that had slowly, over years of peace, transformed into something closer to respect. And among humans, the true story of the vessel and its captain remained known to only a few, tucked away in sealed files and quiet ceremonies, exactly as it had always been meant to be. Not because humanity was ashamed of what they had built, but because they understood, in a way few other species yet did, that the greatest strength sometimes lay not in showing the full extent of one's power, but in the careful, deliberate choice to hold it back, again and again, for as long as holding back remained possible. 10 years after the war's end, a young HFY historian named Das Ilvra requested an interview with the now-retired Vesia Tor for a book she was writing on the conflict, one of the first full accounts of the war, intended for ordinary HFY readers rather than military archives. Vesia Tor, old now, her pale blue skin lined with age in the way of elder HFY, agreed to speak with her in the small coastal house where she had chosen to spend her later years, not far from the capital. "Everyone wants to know about the battle," Das Ilver said, settling into a chair across from the old commander. "The 3,000 ships, the moment everything went dark. But I find myself more curious about what came after. Do you regret the war, Marshal, knowing what you know now?" Vesia Tor considered the question for a long moment before answering, the same careful stillness she had carried throughout her career settling over her features. "I regret that it happened at all," she finally said. "I regret the captain, whose fear led to the first deaths, and I regret my own government's pride, which nearly led to many more. But I do not regret how it ended. I have thought often, in the years since, about what kind of enemy shows that much restraint when it holds that much power. I have come to believe it was not truly our enemy at all. It was a mirror, showing us exactly how close we came to becoming what humanity once was, and exactly how much courage it takes not to become that. Do you believe we understand humans now? Truly understand them?" Vesia Tor smiled faintly, an expression rare enough on her face that Das Ilvra would later describe it carefully in her book. "I believe we understand them better than we did. I do not believe any species fully understands another, not truly, not completely. But I believe we learned something in that war, worth remembering for as long as our people exist. Power without restraint is only ever a disaster waiting for its moment. Power held carefully, and used only when there is no other choice, is something closer to wisdom. I hope, whatever wars our descendants may someday face, they remember which kind of power is worth building." The interview continued for another hour, covering details of the war that had already been written many times over in official histories. But it was that single exchange, printed at the very beginning of Das Ilver's book when it was published the following year, that readers across Kethra space would remember and quote for generations afterward. On Earth, the story of the war with the Kethra Dominion faded, as most wars eventually do, into the quiet pages of history books, remembered clearly by those who had lived through it, and taught carefully to those who came after. New generations of humans grew up knowing Earth as one member of a small but growing community of species, trading and communicating with worlds their grandparents had once gone to war against, the old fear slowly giving way to something more like ordinary neighborly caution. The vessel continued its quiet service for many decades after Elena Reyes retired, passed carefully from captain to captain, each one trained in the same principles she had followed: restraint above all else, escalation only when truly necessary, and a promise kept, generation after generation, never to become again what an earlier generation of humans had once nearly let themselves become. Its name, whatever it truly was, remained known to only a handful of people at any given time, exactly as it had always been meant to be. Not a secret kept out of shame, but a quiet weight carried carefully by those willing to bear it, so that everyone else, human and alien alike, might never have to learn just how heavy that weight truly was. Humanity had sent no army to that war. They had sent only a single ship, and a promise carved into black stone 2 centuries earlier. And in the end, that had been enough.